At least Jonas thought after Gabriel was placed next year, they would see him often because he would be part of the community. If he were released, they would not see him again, ever. Those who were released, even as new children, were sent elsewhere and never returned to the community. So remember, we were talking about the word released, and we didn't know what it meant, other than it can be a really strict punishment. Now we know that people are sent elsewhere to some other place. We don't even know where this elsewhere is that they go. But they never come back to the community, and this is why it is so final. Father had not had to release a single new child this year, so Gabriel would have represented a real failure and sadness. Even Jonas, though he didn't hover over the little one the way Lily and his father did, was glad that Gabe had not been released. Here we see some foreshadowing, too, that Gabe is not being released, and Jonas is glad of that. Maybe this signals a special relationship will develop between the two. The first ceremony began right on time, and Jonas watched as one after another, each new child was given a name and handed by the nurturers to its new family unit. For some, it was a first child, but many came to the stage accompanied by another child, beaming with pride to receive a little brother or sister, the way Jonas had when he was about to be a 5. So some of you might find this interesting, especially if you remember having had a little brother and sister. Many siblings are excited about a new brother and sister, and some siblings are not excited. Sometimes they're nervous or worried. But in this community, we can see that every child is excited, like it's a rule, right? You can't be different. Asher poked Jonas's arm. "Remember when we got Philippa?" he asked in a loud whisper. Jonas nodded. It had only been last year. Asher's parents had waited quite a long time before applying for a second child. Maybe, Jonas suspected, they had been so exhausted by Asher's lively foolishness that they had needed a little time. 2 of their group, Fiona and another female named Thea, were missing temporarily, waiting with their parents to receive new children. But it was rare that there was such an age gap between children in a family unit. When the family ceremony was completed, Fiona took the seat that had been saved for her in the row ahead of Asher and Jonas. She turned and whispered to them, "He's cute, but I don't like his name very much." She made a face and giggled. Fiona's new brother had been named Bruno. It wasn't a great name, Jonas thought, like Gabriel, for example. But it was okay. The audience applause, which was enthusiastic at each naming, rose in an exuberant swell when one parental pair, glowing with pride, took a male new child and heard him named Caleb. This new Caleb was a replacement child. The couple had lost their first Caleb, a cheerful little 4. Loss of a child was very, very rare. The community was extraordinarily safe, each citizen watchful and protective of all children. But somehow, the first little Caleb had wandered away unnoticed and had fallen into the river. The entire community had performed the ceremony of loss together, murmuring the name Caleb throughout an entire day, less and less, frequently, softer in volume, as the long and somber day went on. so that the little four seemed to fade away gradually from everyone's consciousness. Okay, so here is another ceremony or tradition that you can write down in your notes. So when a children is lost or goes away, how does your family react to that? Now, as this special naming, the community performed the brief murmur of replacement, repeating the name for the first time since the loss, softly and slowly at first, then faster and with greater volume, as the couple stood on the stage with the new child sleeping in the mother's arms. It was as if the first Caleb were returning. Another new child was given the name Roberto, and Jonas remembered that Roberto the Old had been released only last week. But there was no murmur of replacement ceremony for the new little Roberto. Release was not the same as lost. So this paragraph makes it sound like the names are used over and over again. Always only one Roberto. Always only one Caleb. What do you think of this? He sat politely through the ceremonies of 2 and 3 and 4, increasingly bored as he was each year. Then a break for midday meal, served outdoors, and back again to the seats for the 5s, 6s, 7s, and finally, last of the first day's ceremonies, the 8s. Jonas watched and cheered as Lily marched proudly to the stage, became an 8, and received the identifying jacket that she would wear this year. This one with smaller buttons and, for the first time, pockets, indicating she was mature enough now to keep track of her own small belongings. She stood solemnly, listening to the speech of firm instructions on the responsibilities of 8, and doing volunteer hours for the first time. But Jonas could see that Lily, though she seemed attentive, was looking longingly at the row of gleaming bicycles, which would be presented tomorrow morning to the 9s. Next year, Lily-Billy, Jonas thought. It was an exhausting day, and even Gabriel, retrieved in his basket from the nurturing center, slept soundly that night. So after these long days of sitting and listening and watching ceremonies, everyone is tired. I would be too, after sitting in the auditorium for an entire day. Finally, it was the morning of the ceremony of 12. Now Father sat beside Mother in the audience. Jonas could see them applauding dutifully as the 9s, one by one, wheeled their new bicycles, each with its gleaming name tag attached to the back from the stage. He knew that his parents cringed a little, as he did, when Fritz, who lived in the dwelling next door to theirs, received his bike, and almost immediately bumped into the podium with it. Fritz was a very awkward child, who had been summoned for chastisement again and again. His transgressions were small ones, always. Shoes on the wrong feet, schoolwork misplaced, failure to study adequately for a quiz. But each such error reflected negatively on his parents' guidance and infringed on the community's sense of order and success. Jonas and his family had not been looking forward to Fritz's bicycle, which they realized would probably too often be dropped on the front walk instead of wheeled neatly into its port. So can you imagine if everyone got in trouble for small crimes or small problems like putting their shoes on the wrong feet or misplacing schoolwork, failure to study adequately for a quiz? So what would that mean for you? Finally, the nines were all resettled in their seats, each having wheeled a bicycle outside where it would be waiting for its owner at the end of the day. Everyone always chuckled and made small jokes when the nines rode home for the first time. "Want me to show you how to ride?" older friends would call. "I know you've never been on a bike before." But invariably, the grinning nines, who, in technical violation of the rule, had been practicing secretly for weeks, would mount and ride off in a perfect balance, training wheels never touching the ground. Then the tins. Jonas never found the ceremony of tin particularly interesting, only time-consuming. So here we can see that Jonas thinks this part is boring. As each child's hair was snipped neatly into its distinguishing cut, females lost their braids at tin, and males, too, relinquished their long, childish hair and took on the more manly, short style, which exposed their ears. Laborers moved quickly to the stage with brooms and swept away the mounds of discarded hair. Jonas could see the parents of the new tins stir and murmur, and he knew that this evening, in many dwellings, they would be snipping and straightening the hastily done haircuts, trimming them in a neater line. So here we have some words: neater line, straightening, hastily done haircuts. So from these words, how well do you think the laborers cut the hair? My guess is the line is not straight if someone has to recut it. 11, it seemed a short time ago that Jonas had undergone the ceremony of 11, but he remembered that it was not one of the more interesting ones. By 11, one was only waiting to be 12. It was simply a marking of time with no meaningful changes. There was new clothing, different undergarments for the females, whose bodies were beginning to change, and longer trousers for the males, with a specially shaped pocket for the small calculator that they would use this year in school. But those were simply presented in wrapped packages, without an accompanying speech. Okay. We'll stop here and continue in part 3.